I'm going to be talking about data, talking about relationships. But Adam has already touched on a subject about the new economic imperative. I mean, the 5 subjects that I'm going to cover real briefly are new economic imperative that we're all living with. That's the button. The one problem that we need to solve, not telling you what it is up front. A quick introduction to what predictive customer experience analytics means, what it's about. An example of solutions that are already in place, and my favorite subject, which is always communication. So I said I was going to start by talking about the new economic imperative. But since I prefer talking about communication, I want to give you something that I say, let's hear from one of your customers. It was actually something about 7, 8 years ago that I heard from one of my customers, because Mary, and I avoided finding some free photo of Cameron Diaz to use for this. This was a comment made about somebody who was working in my team, driving improvement projects for large customers. Mary is not her real name. Okay, so have a look at that. We'll probably come back to that a little bit later. Now, since, of course, Adam and I and others spoke before I presented, I'm not duplicating anything that Adam talked about the new economic imperative. I want to talk about one specific additional point that Adam didn't cover, and this is labor productivity. These are US statistics. Personally, I expected that due to the work-at-home stuff, I thought that having half of the workforce work from home, that would actually be more productive with people working longer days. I witnessed the phenomenon where companies had moved to work at home, they had multi-story office buildings, and then almost immediately they canceled the leases on one or more floors of the buildings. So I was expecting productivity numbers, whether they be in terms of labor hours per output, the unit labor costs per output, and most companies measure the labor costs including the real estate that they consume, including the IT infrastructure that they consume, and so on. I was expecting that they would improve, but hey, this data is out a few weeks ago, and it didn't improve. It got worse. And unless you happen to be in oil production, or that type of thing, or the utilities industries, the economic situation in every other sector has gotten considerably worse in terms of earnings per share and so on. Now you say, well, we're customer experience people, so why would we actually care about that? Because we're all about making the customers happier and so on. And the reason that we care and that we need to care about this is our CEOs, our leadership teams, have started to use a different language from the language that they've been using up to now. It's not talking so much about how fantastic the earnings per share are going to be. Suddenly they're talking about the need for cost efficiency, for everything to be done in a way that will help us recover from these profit hits that we're going to get. To deal with these nasty energy companies who are increasing the costs of operating our buildings and keeping our data centers going and all of this type of thing. They're talking about this. They're talking about the need to be, I'm an industrial engineer by training. It's all about productivity, efficiency. It's very intuitive to me that when you talk about cost effectivity and better growth, what it means is getting the same growth with fewer people, fewer buildings, and paying your suppliers less, right? Those are the only sources of cost improvements other than one-time accounting changes. So your CEOs and leadership teams have started using this type of language. And guess what? They've started a focus on labor productivity. I am certain that at least some of the companies in this room have started to do layoffs in these environments. This is very paranoia-inducing. And guess what? Particularly, with all due respect to the marketing people in this room, marketing is measured primarily on demand generation and sales support. Many customer experience leaders report to the marketing manager. This is non-core for marketing. So the customer experience leaders who report that way are probably at the most at risk of being downsized of any customer experience leader. So this is the language. So what do we, that the CEOs, the leadership teams have started to speak about, have started to prioritize? Yeah, speaking about that economic, it just flashed into my mind. Right when this stuff was starting, at the start of COVID and companies starting to get paranoid, I live near Geneva. My daughter had just finished business school. She interviewed with a Geneva-based company that is represented in this room to join the customer experience team. She was successful in the interview. She was told she would be sent a contract in the mail. Then the company internally announced reductions. She never heard from them ever again. No contract, no phone call, nothing. Right? This stuff is real, right? Somebody was planning on growing their customer experience team. Pressure came on the company. No, freeze everything, reduce, right? That's very human. That's the way these things happen. So we, as customer experience leaders, need to be able to talk to how the company can be more efficient in the resource allocation rather than scattering it randomly around every possible improvement opportunity. Customers suggest to you, if you're doing surveys well, literally hundreds of different things you could improve. Which are the things that are actually worth improving structurally rather than one-off exercises? So we're talking about the more efficient thing, the identification. We need to be able to talk about how to help with growth in this difficult atmosphere and growth that we're most familiar in. We need to be able to talk customer retention in terms of growth, right? If you improve your customer retention rate, if you've got an annuity contract business from, I'm making up the numbers, 92% to 93%, that's growth, right? That's 1% growth of that part of your company. By the way, at one point, when I moved into the corporate software leadership team at HP, I brought in a new manager who'd been the head of Microsoft for North America, and he was appalled that we accepted any customer retention goal measured financially under 100%. Because his view was, you should be good enough at upselling, cross-selling, etc., that the customer who has paid you 100 last year is going to pay you more than 100 this year. Anything under 100% is completely unacceptable. That was his message to all of the large account salespeople. So we need to be able to support that type of discussion even in tough economic times. And we need to be sure that we can make the customer remediation costs as low as possible. Right? I'm going to give some clues as to how we get that. Some of this is going to be around moving things from being proactive to reactive. If I take the classical, not the NPX terminology, but the classical Bain Net Promoter System terminology, some of this is about emphasizing the outer loop work. And the outer loop work is where you're working internally proactively, but being quite selective about what that is, so that you're doing as much proactively so that you don't have to spend margin and create cost issues as you're recovering customers. So we're used to fixing things after they break expensively. Let's face it, that's what detractor recovery and detractor closed loop is about after surveys. It's addressing things that, in general, we didn't know were problems until we didn't know that the customer was angry about it. And then well, as those of you who measure it well know, you wind up with the large accounts that are of detractor status are giving you lower margins than the others because you're renewing them at lower prices and so on, whereas the happy people are renewing at maximum price as well, right? So in that context, and the context of restricted cost, the essence of business strategy is to concentrate your scarce resources on a small number of things that make a difference. In the strategy course that I did years ago in Columbia, they explained it was, you need to be able to count the strategic priorities on the fingers of one hand maximum, because nobody will remember more. The science that everybody remembers 7 things in the short term, it really doesn't hold up all that well. It's about half of the people can remember 7 things, but pretty well everyone can remember 5. So if we are not contributing to what those 3 to 5 strategic priorities are, cost-cutting us might be a strategic priority, right? We need to be paranoid about it and be part of those top 3 to 5 priorities. And of course, we know that treating all customers the same is a gigantic problem. Man, have I had pain on that one. EDS merged with, well, HP acquired EDS in, was it 2006 or 2008? Any ex-EDS people in the room? Okay, that's good. So I was in charge of that integration in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I decided that I would personally go and visit the large EDS customers before the acquisition had been closed completely. And I visited Vodafone in Newbury in the UK. Any ex-Vodafone people in the room? 1. So Vodafone had a great thing, which was a supplier survey. I don't know whether it's still there. But for the largest suppliers, they surveyed their people internally to find out what they thought of the largest suppliers. And I knew the HP results, and they weren't great. And yet, Vodafone spent mega-galactic amounts of money with us. I had EDS's own internal survey of the Vodafone people, and it was fabulous. Went to Newbury, sat down with the people doing the supplier survey and their boss, and said, look, I can make this discussion very short. You love EDS, you hate HP, I hereby commit HP to copying all of these great things that you love about EDS. And it was a German guy running the supplier program, survey program at that time. He works for BP now. And he said, what are you talking about? EDS is much worse than you. And I said, but no, I've got the proof here. And I said, and I had the survey, and I gave it to him. And he said, okay, they got this person, this person, this person, 4 people to answer. He said, none of those 4 have anything to do with the contract, right? So the guys, there was an annual prize in EDS, which was the major account manager. And let's understand, at that point of the merger, EDS was a $25 billion company. 24 accounts represented 52% of the revenue. General Motors alone was $2.5 billion, right? So whoever of the major accounts had the best, what amounted to an NPS score, got $100,000. Well, that's not going to bias the selection of the survey respondents, is it? Because it was the account managers who chose who responded to the survey. Result, you get totally false results for Vodafone, right? Anyway, treating them all that there's the same is a problem, but we've already talked about that. And in the context of strategy, some of the things that we need to do and we need to be able to discuss, we need to be able to force things to be mandatory for the whole corporation. But that requires adopting this language. So I think there is this problem that we need to solve. And I'm going to use some of my own words and some words from McKinsey. Relationship things, yes, there are fantastic stars, some in this room, who get fantastic response rates. Low frequency for relationship survey levels is a problem. Some of the people you're identifying as detractors were promoters a year ago. But what happened in between? You've got a problem. Sample bias, well, the wrong respondents we've talked to. Sample bias, I'm no longer covered by my non-disclosure agreement after retiring from HP in 2011. But I think I'll just say the global account manager for a very, very large Swiss food company was sitting not far from me. And they had just started to get into, God damn it, since I speak French at home, it's called Allocation, so it's the sort of crossover between food and medical products. So suddenly they were covered by FDA and other regulatory stuff. And we'd put software into departments where HP had never sold anything before. So I went to the account manager and I said, fine, we need to do software-only research just in these departments with the regulatory compliance and so on, make sure we're doing okay. And his answer to me immediately was, okay, I'll do it, I'll set it up. What number do you want? And I said, why are you asking this question? You're not measured on NPS. Me and my corporate colleagues made certain that you're not measured on NPS. And he said, yeah, you say that. But a year ago, my NPS score went down. Meg Whitman, the CEO at the time, phoned me and shouted at me, it's never going to happen again. Right? So, yeah. I had to abandon that. I had to just go myself, make the relationships, and talk to some people in Vevey at that anonymous company. So, yeah, it's tough to deal with that, right? Even if you're saying that the people aren't measured on it, they may still think that a decline is their failure if they feel that they're in charge of it. And we do get into life cycle issues. So, yes, this is a problem. Now, this is stuff that McKinsey is saying. That they published this. I'm sure plenty of you have seen it. I'm going to say it's 4 months old, something like that. Even the CX leaders aren't confident that the organization can take action, right? Even CX leaders think that, well, it isn't surprising. Well, clearly a survey on its own, even with great responses, that's not enough to let you have the power, the authority to take action on the root causes. So the author of this was exaggerating to make a point, saying, why would you use surveys if you can already tell what's going on from the operational data? And I don't know the author personally. I don't think that you can live without surveys. But I'm going to talk about a marriage between the two. So, introduction to predictive CX analytics. I've got this OCX Cognition badge and so on. So after retiring from HP, I was approached by Richard Owen, who used to be the CEO of Satmetrics, which he sold to NICE a few years back. And he asked me to come and, he said, here are some shares, come and work with me on a part-time basis. And I love it, right? I've gotten to learn about the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning into the world of customer experience. There is an old new saying, which is, machine learning is written in Python, and artificial intelligence is written in PowerPoint. Because there are very few people who have actually managed to get beyond what amounts to, machine learning to me is kind of very large scale multiple regression, and AI goes a bit beyond it. But the basis of it is that the probability that a customer is in any of the NPS categories, well, it's predictable without a survey. It's explained primarily, but not exclusively, by the operational experience. As people who were in the academy yesterday know, yes, I own a Tesla, I like my Tesla, I am influenced, my views are tainted by a strong dislike of Elon Musk, right? So, but you won't find out anything about what I think about Elon Musk in any type of survey or in any operational data, right? Well, you might in a survey. It depends what question you ask. Once you're into predictive analytics based on operational data, it doesn't change very quickly, right? You can get surprises in the jumps in survey results, but the trends based on operational data tend to be to happen more subtly. So the art is teaching a machine to think like your customer. Now, the way that this is done in short is to treat treat the survey data that you've got as the training database for artificial intelligence software. Now, I'm going to try and cover what I'm talking about. In our customer journey, and yes, this is deliberately in a small font because there's going to be lots of stuff on the slide. Traditional customer journey, I'm choosing the example of a B2B SaaS software company. Where I'm working, it's a startup with 9 customers, and several of them happen to be B2B SaaS companies. So you've got teams of people that are responsible for different phases. Right? You've got the marketing people, the sales people, even finance and HR people who are responsible at the buy phase because they will be having to approve discounts and maybe hire people who are going to do things and so on. So you've got different teams of people. Now, their daily systems that they use depends on where they are in the cycle. What you're seeing is you've got people in marketing using Google Analytics, Engagio, and so on. Of course, in many companies, people are using Salesforce for stuff to do the sales onboarding. In customer success, most probably Gainsight. In implementation, project management, it can be different things. In software development, you're often dealing with Jira, and you're getting a lot of if the request for enhancements are being managed through Jira, you're going to understand the performance on executing on those enhancements very well by looking at Jira data. Each of those systems, and this is deliberately small, there'll be a test on it later. No, you don't need to read it. The point is that each of those systems generates a whole pile of data, but you don't know which ones are the key performance indicators in there. For one of the customers that we're live with and who recently renewed our first annual renewal, there was 2,000 data points being tracked from all of the different systems. So you take the NPS, the survey data that you've got, and you use that as your training database, meaning you take the operational data for the same customers, and you find out which data points, which scores, and which trends predict or correspond to somebody being a promoter, somebody being passive, somebody being a detractor, right? And if you're seeing good separations on that, meaning that the factors that matter for being a promoter and being a detractor are actually different operational factors, that's probably a sign that you're on the right track. But it does mean then that you can predict whether you can predict for the 80% of people who haven't taken your survey, you can use the operational data to tell whether they're probably a promoter, a passive, or a detractor, right? And I hope that makes sense. And the results that we've seen on this so far are, I'm not going to say they're perfect, I'm going to say they're pretty damn good, right? Here is an example. I mean, there is a brand name on there would call the software Spectrum AI. This is real customer data. Oh, by the way, you do get an answer to one of the things that you alluded to earlier, which is, should you be assuming that all people who don't respond are detractors? Which you contradicted in one of your succeeding slides, where the non-respondents tended to give you higher results. But in the absence of knowledge, should you be paranoid is really the question. You were suggesting you should be paranoid. Fred was suggesting it recently as well. So what was going on? So survey data only. What you see here is out of 10,900 customers, this is all B2B, 663 were being covered, right? And we knew what the promoters, passives, and detractors were of those. There was a segmentation by business tier as well, so large, medium, small, so slightly better. The percentage coverage on the largest accounts was best, and on the smallest accounts was worst, and covering, what is that, 18% of the revenue. Yeah, horrible, right? And the reporting frequency was once a year. So, what do you get when you are predicting everything from the operational data? Suddenly, you've got the data for all of the customers, right? Is it perfect? No. It's absolutely a hell of a lot better than having nothing, right? Now, I've got to pick. I know when Fred put up this thing saying you should assume that all non-respondents are detractors, I decided that I would pick. This is page 110 of the hard copy of the Ultimate Question 2.0. Understand, I consider myself a friend of the team. I've never met Fred. I'm looking forward to meeting him tomorrow. We had a scheduled meeting in Boston once, and he wasn't able to make it. I'm the person who has been invited most onto Rob Markey's Net Promoter System podcast, where I was a guest 12 times. So I discussed this particular graph with Rob. How many of you have read that book, Ultimate Question 2.0? Yeah, majority. So you'll probably remember what happened next, right? So this is what's in the book, and I asked Rob, where did the data come from, and is there kind of a curve, an equation that gives you what happens in between the two? And he said, this is based on Bain experience. And my brother and co-author of my books is an Oxford doctorate in cognitive psychology, and we tried to design an experiment to prove this. And we just couldn't do it, because even calling people back to get them to answer biases the results. Oh, yes, you haven't filled out the survey. Please fill it in. And by the way, if you can't give me a 10, phone me in advance. Car salespeople, I'm talking to you, right? Right. So that was the theory. Now, for that customer where I showed you that we were able to predict from the operational data, well, what's the actual reality that we saw? So what we were seeing was that with the small coverage, we were at NPS of +11. With the full coverage, we would be predicting a -12. So this goes along, and all of our customers are B2B. So it's entirely conceivable to me that the Bain experience is correct in consumer land. But with using AI, you can actually prove the relationship reasonably scientifically. So yeah, the NPS score was lower. So this, of course, means that you're identifying a lot more detractors. You might think, fine, oh, great, we can have a close-the-loop program with 189 people, but are you really going to run a close-the-loop program with 5,256 of them, right? This is where you need to be stimulating this proactive discussion and persuading your leadership that it is far more cost-effective in the current cost control environment to be going into the root causes. And of course, root causes is where I'm going to be going in just a second. You also are able to track this continuously. Most of our customers do it monthly, but we've got one doing it weekly, because it just depends on what the company's reporting cycle is. If the company does its main management reports and you want to integrate into it, if they do it weekly, you need to be weekly. If they do it monthly, you need to be monthly. So you get to see what's going on in between survey cycles, and hey, on whatever KPI you're tracking here, suddenly somebody has become, has gotten red status. But you found that out without a survey. And they're still red for a while you're working on the remediation. Then you start to see the improvement, and you're recovering them. Again, hopefully in a highly proactive way. So the fundamental theory of it is this. We're using the predictive CX metrics. The operational reality for the customer results in their view of your company expressed by in the surveys and expressed in terms of a number in NPS. So you're developing this predictive metric from this. This example is a real-life one, and it's from one of the B2B SaaS companies. And yes, instead of taking 2,000 KPIs and trying to put them on a screen, we've got a bunch of them which are all about the requests for enhancement. So RFEs, requests for enhancement. How many software people in a room? Yeah, plenty. So then what we're doing with the AI model is reversing that flow. We're saying, fine, we're going to take what we know is the result, train the model using the NPS data, and then attribute what we found back to each of the operational things. So here we've got a situation where overall it's very nice. We're able to see which customer journey steps is a positive one, what operational driver is having an impact, and then since the request for enhancement stuff is important, it's this particular one that turned out to be the most important. So you want to you want to invest the most in an engineering, software engineering area that has the greatest impact on the NPS, on retention, etc. That's the one. It's not some random thing driven by the software engineering manager's opinion. It's driven by data. And it's expressed in the language of the software development team, right? It's not expressed in a meta language that we CX people talk about. We're not saying NPS and so on. We're saying, hey guys, these requests for enhancements, this is the way that we're dealing with this has having great results for our customers. We need to actually put a bit more money into that, right, and do even better. So that's the way that works. Now let's see how that's worked in practice. So if you've got a reasonably classical thing, and you've taken, and again, this is real customer stuff. Let's suppose you're only covering part of the life cycle, and you discover that the way that you're dealing with the onboarding and with service is having a very positive impact. By the way, I got a surprise with this in real life because I'm a strong preacher of the customer experience score philosophy, which states at the heart of it is that support services can't create a promoter. Meaning that support contact centers can just be good enough, and then they prevent detractors. That turns out to not always be true. So this was a real-life example where operational performance in the contact center work was the single factor that had the biggest impact on promoters. Now, does this mean that that's where we should be concentrating investments to be as most effective as possible in the current economic environment? Well, it turned out that the answer to that was no, because when you did the full economic environment, what happened was this. These were the top 5 factors that were expressed in terms of customer journey stages or individual teams. So the implementation project management was the biggest issue. Remember Mary? This wasn't Mary, but this was other people. And in this particular company, it did turn out that the core of the implementation project management issue was that the majority of the people driving the implementation projects were fully trained in software engineering, but had not got PMP or Prince2 project management training. So it was constant scope creep and other enemies of implementing things, right? So, and then I'd say with the customers that we've got so far, the biggest surprise I've had is how consistently issues show up in the Salesforce data. Tying that back to relationships, and for those who heard me speak 3 years ago, this is where you get the issues with passives. So in other words, this issue in couples in real life with customers as well, where a sales team and others, or the whole company may say, well, the customer's not saying anything, so everything must be fine. Yet meanwhile, the competitor is in there, offering them flowers, and they're gone. And you show up. I mean, Richard Owen told this story in a webcast recently, that he was, as CEO of Satmetrics, he had his inside contact in one of their largest customers saying, yep, it's going to renew. The salesperson was saying it was going to renew. Neither of them were talking to the people, none of them were talking to the correct people, and they lost them to someone else that I wouldn't dream of naming that begins with an M. So the point about this is you can identify the top priorities that are worth the biggest investment. You can go as far as saying, and actually investments that we may already be making in some of the other spaces don't matter as much as we thought. And so maybe we need to shift the funding, right? But it gives you a language that the people already speak. You can talk to the implementation project managers and not talk to them about NPS, but talk to them about data that's already in their systems. Talk to the software developers about stuff that's already in Jira, and so on. So what this is about, again, is effective. It's the effectivity argument around the closed loop systems. So we know that today, if it's survey-based purely, you're identifying a fraction of the detractors. It's identifying it much later than you want. And you've not got an economic analysis on it. You just, it's firefighting mode. There's a fire, let's put it out. We don't care what it costs, right? So we're moving to the proactive closed loop where we're trying to do that. And because of the volumes that we're talking about and the pervasiveness, we're able to work out what the ROI is. Think about like that big volume of detractors. When you're talking about the huge number that there probably are, then suddenly it becomes much easier to have a sensible and complete ROI discussion on what you're proposing. So the last point that I'm going to talk about is my favorite. I'm going to do it very briefly. So yes, it's all about relationships internally and externally. There was something about Mary. Everybody remember what that was? Yeah, Mary didn't have any project management training. And you're able to talk to Mary's manager and so on, not in terms of NPS, but in terms of project management. And het is heel belangrijk om met mensen in hun eigen taal te kunnen praten. C'est extrêmement important de pouvoir parler à vos équipes internes et aux clients dans leur propre langue. This equips you to go and have a discussion with each department in your company based on the metrics, the KPIs that they're already measured on, that are already in their goal sheets. You don't need to speak a meta language to them about CX and KPIs. The point, though, that what's important about Mary is, unfortunately, communication doesn't work unless you can add a level of emotion to it. And analytics of your operational data just doesn't give you the emotion. Getting the quotes from the customers that are relevant to the operational point that you're trying to make, right? If I can accompany my argument for a strong investment in project management training for all of the implementation PMs with quite attractive emotional quotes that are from real customers with real names, man, that's powerful, right? And you'll get people who won't actually care about the data once they do that. That's the old System 1 and System 2 thing for people who love that stuff, which I do. People react with the emotions first and sometimes won't listen to the data. So if you can align the emotion to the data, don't pick a random quote, pick the thing where you want the investment to be, you're going to be successful that way. And it's talking about not explaining the past, but it's talking about predicting the future. So you're going to be talking to your leadership about substituting analytics for proactive analytics from being 100% reactive. Predictive analytics do solve the data problem. Sigrid is going to be talking about some of that tomorrow. Stefan is going to be, from Heineken, is going to be talking about the need to, the way that you engage all of the different teams effectively, and how speaking those teams' languages is important to your ability to do that. So you're going to see some of that stuff reinforced. And the communication is about improving the external and internal relationships. Be paranoid, seriously. In a tough economic environment, you are at risk. Be paranoid, use these types of things, get engaged in the internal and the external relationships that you need to. It's about the data. It's about the relationships. And that's all I was planning on saying today. Thank you.